Hello friends, this is the first in a series I'm going to do on building an audio test station. Turns out this channel I've done a lot of sort of informal audio tests. I'm going to try to get more rigorous about that, but this shows you what I've got to get started with. I'm at the early stages of building this, but I have the basic pieces already. This is a Marantz AV receiver that I've already reviewed in a previous series. So think of this spot as the unit under test. I've got this pair of Polk Audio speakers, M series, that I'm currently evaluating, but at some point I'll end up with some reference speakers that I picked from my collection. Up here I've got a DVD player that I'm playing this CD through, and it has a digital audio output. We'll talk more about that in a second. I've got an oscilloscope, I've got a computer, got a Sound Blaster card that produces digital audio over optical as well as analog audio if you want to work with that. Keyboard and mouse to go with the computer. So I've already got all the basics here. I've got other stuff in boxes that I'll deploy later on. But let's talk about the first problem that I ran into. I was surprised that this Marantz didn't output audio on its kind of, record out. It has a set of outputs for that, tape and so on. They have like 3 or 4 different categories. But it doesn't seem to output digital audio sources through those in analog form, which kind of surprised me. The book says that this outputs whatever you're listening to on those ports, and that seems to need a caveat for it. Doesn't apply to digital. So I'd planned to use this little Blu-ray DVD player, and I've got this little tiny VGA monitor that goes with it. That has a digital audio output, which I thought would be sufficient, but in this case I also need analog audio outputs for kind of comparative purposes, at least if this becomes my reference receiver. Maybe it won't. But my next step is going to be to replace this Blu-ray player with a SACD player that I also reviewed in a previous video. So my thought is that this should have really super high quality analog audio outputs as well as digital audio outputs. So that'll be flexible, and it'll also give me a kind of a stand to put the oscilloscope on top of, which isn't all bad. So I'll put that in place and we'll try that out. As it turns out, the optical cables that I had to connect the digital output of the SACD player to the Marantz is only about 2 feet long, which wasn't long enough to go up high here. So anyway, we put it down here. No big deal for now. And also in between, since the last segment, I've set up a series of bookshelf speakers. I already had these JBLs in this area. I've added the Baby Advent, these Polk monitor series. This is Polk M series, and I've done some listening tests with these. I made a short video already about the Polk monitor series 2 speakers. Long story short is they're just completely lacking on the low end, so they don't sound good at all. I've done some listening tests already with all 4 of these and kind of comparative tests, and it's interesting what I've come up with here. I got my 2 adult kids involved since their ears are better than mine, and what we came up with was that the JBL and the Baby Advent are pretty comparable. I prefer these Polk M series. These have a nice bass response that kind of jumps out at me, but maybe that's more of a personal preference thing. But in particular, from the audio workstation point of view, we've got this is a 1 to 4 switch, so I've got outputs coming from the Marantz into 4 outputs here to the speakers, and this allows me to do A/B testing between these 4 sets of audio speakers at the kind of the bookshelf level. So we'll cover that a little bit to show you what that's all like. To give you a feel for this, I've got the Baby Advent speakers running right now. I'm not a great believer in listening tests through the medium of YouTube, so I'm going to tell you my impressions. The Baby Advents sound good. They're solid. They're plausible. We can switch those out and go to the JBL. They really sound about comparable to me and my kids that have evaluated those. Now let's go to the Polk Audio monitor series. That may come through on the video, but they just sound very thin, and I've done some quick measurements and found that they're just lacking the low end, starting at about 200 Hertz, which is just kind of way too high. So they may be okay in a supplemented system with some sort of subwoofer. Maybe they're intended to be used that way, but they're really not usable as kind of a standalone bookshelf speaker. So I'm going to try to combine those in a future video, but for now they're kind of off my list of favorite bookshelf speakers. Let's bring in the Polk M series here. That may come through. They have a definite, to my ears at least, a boost in the bass side. I think it's a good boost. It could be deemed too much maybe, but it doesn't have a booming quality. It just has a real kind of plausible sort of, realistic quality. So all of these sets, we've done some imaging tests, and we found that they work well as far as imaging goes. I found out a lot of the Ella Fitzgerald recordings from the 50s are really well done in stereo terms. So I ran Jingle Bells that she did with Louis Armstrong, and turns out that's a good stereo recording that can be used for kind of stereo evaluation. So that's something to consider if you want to do that kind of thing. So here we are finishing up on this element of the workstation. I think it's going to work out pretty well for my purposes. I'm going to be basically swapping out speakers for evaluation, comparing against these 3. I'll remove this one and put in other speakers that I've got in a stockpile to evaluate, and we'll kind of go from there. So that wraps up this segment of our series. Look for more on my audio test station coming soon. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.